The empty ranch, the sun was sinking behind the rocky hills, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, when the old rancher pushed open the wooden door of his small house. His boots made a hollow sound against the dusty porch, and his tired eyes looked over the wide, empty land. Once this ranch had been full of life. Cattle moved across the fields, fences stood tall, and the sound of laughter echoed when neighbors came to visit. Now, only silence remained. The fences were broken, the barns were falling apart, and weeds had taken over the fields. The rancher was old, with hair as white as snow, and hands rough from a lifetime of hard work. He had no family left. The last neighbor had left the valley, years ago, moving closer to the human colonies where life was easier. But the rancher stayed. He stayed because this was the land of his youth, the place where he had buried his wife, the place where his memories still walked with him. Every morning, he fed the few animals that remained, a pair of old horses and a small group of chickens. They were as tired as he was. He often spoke to them, not because they answered, but because the silence of the ranch was heavier than any weight he could carry. At night, he sat by the fire, drinking black coffee, staring at the flames, and wondering how many more sunsets he would see. But lately, the silence was not complete. Strange things had begun to happen. It started with lights in the sky. At first, the rancher thought it was a trick of the eyes. A shimmer in the distance, a shooting star, maybe even a broken satellite burning up in the atmosphere. But the lights kept coming, brighter each night. They moved in ways no star should move, changing direction, slowing down, sometimes hovering like lanterns hung above the land. One evening, while walking back from the chicken coop, the rancher froze. He heard voices. They were faint, like whispers, carried by the wind. He turned his head, expecting to see a traveler or maybe kids from the nearest colony. But the valley was empty. The sound came again, soft and strange, in a language he did not understand. His horses stamped nervously in the stable, and even the chickens grew restless. The old man told himself it was his mind playing tricks. He was old, after all. Loneliness could do strange things to a man. But deep inside, a part of him knew these were not dreams. Something or someone was out there. That night, as he sat by the fire, he remembered the wars of his youth. Long ago, he had served as a soldier before coming to the ranch. He remembered battlefields under alien skies, remembered hearing strange languages shouted across the chaos of war. Those voices he heard now, they were not human. The rancher tried to ignore it, but curiosity gnawed at him. He stepped outside, staring at the wide, starlit sky. And there, above the hills, the lights returned. 3 orbs of white light floated, silently, moving as if they were searching for something. For a long moment he stood frozen, his heart beating faster than it had in years. Then, as quickly as they came, the lights vanished into the black sky. The next morning, the rancher found tracks near the barn. They were not made by boots, nor by hooves. The prints were long, thin, and curved, pressed deep into the soft earth as if something heavy had walked there. He knelt down, running his hand over the marks, and his breath caught. Whatever had visited his ranch was not human. Fear touched him, but so did a strange spark of excitement. For years he had been waiting for death, living day by day in silence. But now something had disturbed that silence. Something had stepped into his lonely world. That night, the wind howled stronger than usual, rattling the broken shutters of the house. The rancher sat by his fire again, shotgun resting across his knees. He told himself it was for safety, but he also knew he was waiting for those voices, waiting for those lights. And when the clock ticked past midnight, the voices came, again, closer this time. He heard the sound of footsteps outside the house, slow and deliberate. The horses neighed, pulling against their ropes, and the chickens clucked in panic. The old man's grip on the shotgun tightened. The doorknob rattled. For a moment, everything went still. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and the rancher's heart thudded in his chest. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice spoke. Not in human words, but in that same strange language he had heard before. It was soft, almost pleading. The rancher did not move. He did not breathe. Outside, shadows shifted in the moonlight, tall and thin with shapes unlike any man. He counted 1, 2, 3, until his porch seemed filled with them. 11 shadows stood silent in the dark, as if waiting for him to answer. The old rancher, alone at the end of his days, suddenly found himself no longer alone. The first visitor the next morning, the old rancher woke with heavy eyes. He had hardly slept. All night long he had listened to those strange voices outside his door. When the sun finally rose, the voices had gone, leaving only silence again. But the memory of those shadows on his porch stayed with him, sharp and alive. He stepped outside with his coffee mug in hand. The cold air bit his skin, and the smell of dust and dry earth filled his lungs. The yard looked the same as always, old fences, broken barn, weeds dancing in the wind. But near the porch he noticed something new. A small object lay on the ground. At first he thought it was a piece of metal, maybe junk carried by the wind. But when he bent down, his fingers touched something smooth and warm. It was a ring, larger than any human hand would wear. The surface glowed faintly like starlight trapped in silver. The rancher closed his fist around it, his heart racing. Whoever had stood at his door last night had left this behind. A gift? Or a warning? He spent the day restless, fixing fences that didn't need fixing, feeding chickens that hardly ate, walking circles around the empty barn. Every time he looked to the hills, he expected to see those lights again. But nothing came. It was near sunset when he heard the sound. Not voices this time, but footsteps. Clear, steady footsteps crossing the yard. He froze, his old soldier instincts waking. His hand reached for the shotgun leaning by the porch. Out of the shadows stepped a tall figure. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly pale like moonlight. Her hair was long and dark, braided with silver threads that caught the dying sun. She wore robes made of strange fabric, heavy and ceremonial, with markings that glowed faintly, like the ring he had found. Her eyes met his, and he felt a shiver run through him. They were large, dark, and filled with something he did not expect. Sorrow. The rancher raised his shotgun halfway. "Stop right there," he said, his voice rough but steady. The figure stopped. Slowly she lowered her head and knelt. Right. There in the dirt of his yard, she bent down on one knee. Her long fingers pressed to the ground as if in respect, or maybe surrender. Then she spoke. The words were soft, musical, but strange. A language he could not understand. Yet the tone carried meaning. It was not a threat. It was not anger. It was plea. The old man stood frozen, shotgun still in his hands. His heart pounded like a drum. Why would an alien kneel before him? Why here, in his dying ranch? The woman raised her head slightly, speaking, again. She touched her chest, then stretched her hand toward him. Her voice cracked, and for a moment it sounded like she was holding back tears. The rancher's throat felt dry. He lowered the shotgun, though not completely. "I don't understand you," he said quietly. "But I hear you." The alien woman's gaze softened. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected his answer. Then she reached to her robe and pulled out something shining. A second ring, larger than the one he had found in the morning. She placed it carefully on the ground before her, bowing her head again. The old man stepped forward cautiously, his boots crunching in the dirt. He stared at the ring, its glow pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "Why me?" he whispered. The woman looked up, her eyes meeting his again. She did not answer in words, but the pain in her face spoke louder than speech. Loss, loneliness, desperation. She was a widow. He could feel it without her saying it. A widow looking for something she could no longer find in her own kind. The rancher's chest tightened. For years he had lived with his own loss, his own emptiness. And now, before him, stood a being from the stars who carried the same weight. The O. Silence stretched between them, heavy but strange, almost sacred. Then behind her, the shadows moved again, More figures appeared at the edge of the yard. The rancher counted them, 1, 2, 3, until 11 tall shapes stood in the fading light. All wore the same dark robes, all carried the same sorrow in their eyes. The old man stumbled back a step, shotgun rising again. 11 of them. 11 alien widows. And all of them were looking at him. His throat tightened. He felt small under their gaze, like a single candle in a vast storm. He had nothing to give. No wealth, no strength, no future. He was an old man, waiting for death. Why would they come to him? The first woman rose slowly from the dirt, her silver-threaded hair catching the last glow of the sun. She stepped closer, her voice soft but clear, speaking words he could not understand. Yet her eyes never left his, and somehow he knew the meaning. They had chosen him. The old rancher's hands trembled on the shotgun. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, but also more afraid than ever before. What did these widows want from him? And what would happen if he refused? The setting sun dipped fully below the hills, and night wrapped the ranch in darkness. 11 alien widows stood in his yard, silent and waiting. And the lonely old man realized his quiet, dying days were over. 11 shadows. The night air was cold, and the stars above seemed sharper than usual. The old rancher stood frozen on his porch, gripping the shotgun though his arms trembled. 11 alien widows now filled his yard. Their tall, robed figures moved slowly, their silver-threaded hair catching the faint glow of the moon. They did not attack, did not raise weapons. Instead, they simply stood in silence, watching him. The first widow, the one who had knelt before him, lifted her hand. Her fingers spread apart, glowing softly as if the stars themselves lived in her skin. She pointed to the ground near her feet, then to the old man, and finally touched her own chest. The movement was slow, deliberate. The rancher understood none of their words, but he felt their intent. They had come with purpose, not accident. He could see it in their eyes, eyes filled with grief, but also with determination. The rancher's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "What do you want from me?" The 11 widows shifted, their robes rustling like dry leaves. The first one stepped forward again, placing the glowing ring she had laid on the ground into her palm. She held it out to him, offering it as if it were more than a gift, as if it were a binding promise. The old man's throat tightened. "No, you don't understand. I'm just a man, an old man. You must be looking for someone else." But the widow did not lower her hand. Behind her, the other 10 moved closer, their shapes casting long shadows across the ranch. One by one, they lowered to their knees, bowing their heads to him. The sight was so unreal that for a moment the rancher thought he might be dreaming. 11 alien widows, kneeling in his yard as though he were their chosen king. His knees felt weak, and he leaned against the porch post to steady himself. "Why me?" he whispered. There was no answer in words. Instead, one of the widows began to hum, a low, haunting melody that carried through the night air. Another joined her, then another, until all 11 voices blended into a song that seemed both ancient and sorrowful. The sound wrapped around the old rancher like a cold wind, raising the hair on his arms. He did not understand the language, but he understood the feeling. It was a song of loss, of battles fought, of husbands buried. These were not warriors seeking conquest. They were survivors, widows searching for something, or someone, to carry their pain with them. The rancher closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years he thought of his late wife. He remembered the way she had laughed in the kitchen, the way she had held his hand on summer nights when the stars seemed endless. He remembered burying her beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the ranch, and how empty the world had felt since then. When he opened his eyes, the widows were still kneeling. Their glowing eyes reflected his firelight, and their song faded into silence. One of them, younger than the rest, raised her head and whispered a single word, one he almost understood. It sounded like protector. The old man's grip on the shotgun loosened. He set it down slowly against the porch rail. His voice was quiet but steady. "I can't protect anyone. I can barely protect myself." The younger widow shook her head, her silver braids swaying. She touched the ground with her palm, then pointed again at him, her face soft but firm. It was not his strength they had come for. It was something else. The rancher stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching in the dirt. He walked closer, his heart hammering in his chest. The widows did not move. They stayed bowed, waiting. When he reached the first woman, the one who had arrived alone, he hesitated. She lifted the glowing ring toward him again. His hand shook as he reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the ring, a jolt of warmth shot up his arm. Not pain, not fear, but a strange energy, alive and pulsing. His vision blurred, and for a brief second he saw flashes, burning skies, alien battlefields, a throne left empty, and 11 women standing alone among ruins. He gasped and stumbled back, dropping the ring. The widow caught it before it touched the ground, her dark eyes watching him with intensity. "What did you show me?" he whispered. The widow spoke again, her voice steady. Though he did not know her words, he felt their weight. "This is why." The other widows rose slowly now, their tall figures surrounding him in a circle. He was not their prisoner, but their choice. They had crossed stars, escaped war, and followed destiny, and destiny had led them to this lonely old rancher on a dying piece of land. The old man stood among them, his breath shallow. For years he had prayed for an end, for silence. Now, 11 alien widows had broken that silence and handed him a role he never asked for. The stars above burned brighter, and somewhere in the distance, a faint rumble echoed across the hills. The rancher's instincts told him danger was near. That whatever hunted these women was not far behind. He looked at the widows again, their faces lined with sorrow but also with unshakable faith. They believed he was the one. And for the first time in decades, the old man wondered if he had a purpose still left in him. The ancient pact. The night stretched long, but the rancher did not sleep. He sat by the fire with the 11 alien widows, gathered silently around his yard. Their tall shapes swayed in the cold wind, their glowing eyes watching him like stars come down to earth. He wanted to believe this was all a dream, but the ring still glowed faintly in his hand, warm and alive, reminding him it was real. The widows had not left. They stayed, as if bound to him now. Sometimes they whispered to each other in their strange language, low and mournful, and other times they only stared at the sky as if waiting for something, or someone, to arrive. At dawn, the first widow stepped forward again. She gestured to him, then to the hills, as if asking him to follow. The old man hesitated. He was tired, his bones aching, his spirit worn thin. Yet something inside pulled him forward. He saddled his old horse, though the creature trembled nervously near the alien women and rode slowly behind them. The widows moved with grace, their long robes brushing over the dirt without sound. They led him to the valley beyond the ranch, to a place he rarely visited. At the center stood a great stone circle, ancient and cracked, half buried in weeds. The rancher had always thought it was just ruins from settlers long ago. But when the widows reached it, their voices rose in a chant. The markings carved into the stone glowed faintly as if waking from centuries of sleep. The first widow turned to him and placed both her hands on the stone. She spoke clearly now, her voice steady and commanding, though still in her alien tongue. The chant of the others grew louder, and suddenly the rancher's head filled with images not his own. He saw a throne of black metal. He saw a tall alien king, armored and proud, standing before a crowd. Around him stood the 11 widows dressed as queens. Then came fire, warships falling from the sky, and the king cut down in battle. The widows stood alone, the kingdom burning behind them. The vision shifted. A voice echoed, deep and powerful. By the pact, widows must not stand alone. By the pact, they must be bound to a protector chosen by fate, and fate will guide them across the stars. The rancher gasped as the vision ended. He stumbled back, clutching his chest. "No," he muttered. "This can't be. You've made a mistake." But the widows stared at him, their eyes unwavering. They had not made a mistake. To them, he was the one destiny had led them to. The old man shook his head. "I'm no king. I'm no protector. I'm just a rancher. Old, broken, useless." His voice cracked with pain. One of the widows, her hair braided with gold strands, stepped forward. She touched his hand gently, and for a moment, her thoughts spilled into his mind. Not words, but feelings, grief, loneliness, and hope. She had lost everything, yet still believed in the pact, still believed in him. The rancher pulled his hand, back, his eyes wet. "I buried my wife under the oak tree. I couldn't even protect her from sickness. How can I protect you from whatever hunts you?" The widows exchanged glances. Then the first one knelt before him once more, pressing the glowing ring to her forehead before offering it again. The others followed, lowering to their knees in the circle of stone. 11 alien queens bowing to a dying rancher. The wind howled across the valley, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The rancher stood trembling, the weight of their choice heavy on his shoulders. Deep inside, he wanted to walk away, to return to his porch, to live out his last days in silence. But another part of him, the soldier he once was, the husband he had been, rose again. These women had no one else. Fate or madness had brought them here. He picked up the glowing ring, his hand steady this time. The widows lifted their heads, eyes shining with quiet relief. The first widow placed her hand over his, closing his fingers around the ring. Her voice was soft, almost gentle now, but he understood the meaning without words. "You are ours. We are yours." The ground beneath the stone circle rumbled faintly, as if the land itself recognized the pact being renewed. The glowing carvings brightened, casting long shadows over the valley. The rancher's heart pounded, his chest heavy with something he had not felt in years. Purpose. But even as the widows sang softly in their strange tongue, his ears caught something else. A distant roar. Engines. The sound of ships cutting through the sky. He looked up sharply, and the widows did too. Far on the horizon, black dots moved against the morning sun. Warships. The widows grew tense, their hands reaching beneath their robes for weapons hidden in silver sheaths. Their eyes were no longer soft with sorrow. They burned with fury now. The rancher's mouth went dry. Whoever had destroyed their king's throne had followed them here, and by taking the widow's rings, by standing in that circle, he had stepped into their war. The sound of ships grew louder, filling the valley like thunder. The old rancher gripped the glowing ring tight, his jaw set. He had no choice anymore. Destiny had chosen him. Enemies at the gate. The rancher stood at the center of the old stone circle, gripping the glowing ring in his hand. His heart pounded like a drum, not from age this time, but from the sound that shook the valley. Engines roared above the hills. Dark shapes cut through the morning sky, ships heavy and sharp, hunting ships. The alien widows moved quickly now. Their sorrowful stillness was gone. They spread out, forming a protective wall around the rancher. Each pulled weapons from hidden sheaths, blades that glimmered with strange light, spears that crackled with energy, bows made from shining metal. Their eyes were hard, no longer pleading, but fierce. The old rancher had seen that look before. Not on their faces, but on soldiers long ago, men who knew battle was coming. The ships grew closer, their shadows sweeping over the valley. Dust rose as engines thundered low. The rancher's horse reared in panic, pulling at its rope. Chickens scattered from the barn, squawking wildly. Even the ground seemed to tremble as the enemy descended. The old man swallowed hard. He was no soldier anymore. His knees ached, his lungs burned when he walked too far. But still his hands knew the weight of a weapon. He picked up his shotgun from the ground, pumping it with a sound that echoed sharp against the growing thunder. The widows glanced at him, their glowing eyes flashing approval. They had seen his doubt before, but now they saw something else. The first ship landed near the broken fences of the ranch. Its doors opened with a hiss, and figures poured out. Tall, armored, brutal-looking. Their weapons glowed red, humming with deadly power. They moved like wolves, spreading out, surrounding the ranch. The rancher counted quickly. 15, maybe 20. More were coming behind. His throat tightened, but his mind stayed sharp. He had seen worse odds in his youth. The trick was not to fight the numbers head-on, but to use the land, the traps, the weaknesses. "Get to cover," he muttered, his voice low. Though the widows did not understand his words, but they seemed to understand his intent. They moved with him as he slipped back toward the barn. Inside, the smell of dust and hay filled his nose. He pulled open a chest hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside lay old tools, rusty traps, coils of wire, boxes of nails. He grabbed what he could, his hands moving fast despite the years. The widows watched him with curiosity, but when he began laying the traps, their faces changed. They understood. They helped. Their hands were faster, sharper, weaving energy lines through his old wires, turning simple traps into deadly snares. The rancher almost smiled. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone. Outside, the warlord's soldiers advanced. One of them shouted in a deep, guttural voice, words that made the widows stiffen with anger. The meaning was clear: surrender or die. The old man stepped from the barn, shotgun resting on his shoulder. He spat into the dirt, his face lined with defiance. "You picked the wrong ranch," he muttered. The first enemy soldier stepped forward, weapon raised. A widow moved faster than the eye could follow, her silver spear flashing. The soldier fell before he could fire. Then the battle began. Blades clashed with energy rifles. Spears pierced armor. The widows moved like shadows, their song of sorrow, now turned into cries of war. The rancher fired his shotgun, each blast knocking back armored foes. His traps sprang to life, wires snapping tight around legs, spikes dropping from the barn roof, pits hidden under loose boards swallowing soldiers whole. The enemy screamed in fury. They had expected weak prey, widows hiding in grief. Instead, they found a fight, but the rancher knew it was not enough. For every soldier that fell, 2 more stepped out of the ships. Their numbers were endless, and their weapons burned hotter with each shot. In the chaos, the rancher shouted to the widows, pointing to the hills. He couldn't say the words they would understand, but his gesture was clear. Fall back, regroup, use the land. They listened. Together they moved toward the higher ground, drawing the fight into the narrow pass where numbers mattered less. The widows fought like fire, their blades cutting arcs of light. The rancher covered their backs, his eyeing, shotgun booming, his trap snapping shut on enemies who chased too close. Still, the sound of engines grew louder. More ships were coming. From the largest ship, a new figure stepped out, taller than the rest, wrapped in black armor, his helmet crowned with horns of steel. The widows froze when they saw him. Their song of war faltered, replaced by silence. The ranchers saw it too, the warlord himself, the one who had burned their kingdom, the one who had killed their king. His very presence filled the valley with dread. The old man's hands tightened on the shotgun. His heart raced, not from fear of death, but from the weight of what was now on his shoulders. He was no longer just defending an empty ranch. He was standing against a warlord with 11 alien widows at his side, and the enemy had just arrived at his gate. The hidden strength, the valley shook with the roar of the warlord's arrival. His soldiers stopped their advance, forming a wall of steel around their leader. The widows stood in silence, weapons in hand, their faces tight with fury. They knew him. The man in black armor was the one who had destroyed their kingdom. He had taken their king, their homes, and their lives. The rancher felt the weight of their grief press against him like a storm. His shotgun suddenly felt small, his old traps like toys against the force that had just stepped into his world. But he did not lower his weapon. The warlord raised his hand. His voice thundered across the valley in a language the rancher didn't know, but its meaning was clear: surrender or die. The widows answered not with words, but with defiance. They raised their glowing blades, their voices rising together in a battle chant that shook the air. Their sorrow became fire. Their fear became steel. The rancher felt something stir deep inside him. He had thought his life was nearly over, that he was a useless old man. But as he looked at the widows, standing like a wall against death itself, something in him refused to give up. He shouted, his voice hoarse but powerful. "You want to fight? You came to the wrong ranch." The warlord gave a sharp signal. His soldiers surged forward again. The battle exploded. Blades clashed against energy weapons, the sound of metal and fire echoing off the hills. The widows fought with skill and fury, each movement a deadly dance. They were fast, sharper than the soldiers, but outnumbered. The rancher stayed behind, them, firing his shotgun with steady aim. Each blast sent an armored soldier crashing into the dirt. But soon the shotgun clicked empty. No shells left. He dropped it, grabbing an old axe from the barn wall. His body ached, but his arms remembered the swing. He moved with the widows, striking where they struck, covering their blind sides, guiding them into tighter lines of defense. At first, the widows seemed surprised, but then they began to follow his rhythm. When he pointed, they shifted. When he shouted, they listened. Slowly, their fight became organized, no longer scattered. The rancher had been a soldier once, long ago, and though his body was weaker now, his mind was sharp. He saw openings, weaknesses in the enemy's rush. He knew how to use the narrow pass of the valley to their advantage. "Pull back," he shouted, waving his axe toward the ridge. The widows moved with him, their chant rising louder. The enemy chased, tripping into traps he had set hours before, ropes that snapped tight, hidden spikes that drove into their legs, pits covered with loose boards. Each fall gave the widows a chance to strike. The rancher felt alive. Pain screamed. In his joints, sweat burned his eyes, but inside his chest something powerful burned. Purpose. The warlord himself finally moved, stepping forward with a weapon like a black blade of fire. The widows froze for a moment, their courage tested by his presence. The rancher saw their fear. He stepped in front of them, raising his axe. "You've taken enough from them," he said. "If you want more, you'll have to go through me." The warlord tilted his head, almost amused. His blade hummed, casting red light across the valley. The first strike came fast. The rancher barely blocked, the axe shaking in his hands from the impact. He stumbled back, but the widows cried out and rushed to his side. Their blades met the warlord's, sparks flying. For a moment, it was chaos. Steel against steel. Fire against light. The widows fought with fury, but the warlord was stronger, his strikes heavy enough to push them back. The rancher swung again and again, his body screaming with each movement. He knew he could not match the warlord's strength, but strength was not his weapon. His weapon was cunning. He remembered the old mines beneath the ridge, tunnels left abandoned decades ago. If he could draw the warlord there. "Follow me," he shouted, pointing toward the ridge. The widows hesitated, but then they saw his plan in his eyes. Together, they pulled back step by step, leading the enemy higher into the narrow ground. The warlord chased, his blade burning hotter, soldiers at his back. The rancher reached the ridge, heart pounding, vision blurry. He struck his axe into the ground where the mine supports lay hidden. Wood cracked, the earth trembled. With a roar, the ridge gave way. Rocks and dirt tumbled down, swallowing half the enemy soldiers. The warlord staggered but did not fall. Dust filled the air. The widows coughed, their glowing eyes shining through the haze. They turned to the rancher, their voices rising in awe. For the first time, they saw not just an old man, but a leader. The warlord stood across the broken ground, his eyes burning through the helmet. He had not been defeated, not yet, but he had been stopped. For the first time, his soldiers hesitated. The widows raised their weapons again, their chant turning into a song of defiance. The rancher stood with them, axe in hand, chest heaving, but spirit unbroken. He had no army. He had no strength of youth, but he had something the warlord did not expect. He had hidden strength, the final choice. The dust from the collapsed ridge still hung in the air, drifting like smoke across the battlefield. Broken rocks buried half the enemy soldiers, but the warlord still stood, tall and unshaken. his black blade glowing like fire. His eyes burned through the helmet, fixed on the old rancher. The widows gathered around their chosen protector. Their weapons glowed. Their voices rose in a chant that filled the valley with defiance. Yet even as their song grew strong, they knew the truth. The warlord was not beaten. He was only slowed. The rancher gripped his axe tightly. His chest heaved. His arms trembled, but his spirit did not bend. He had lived his final days expecting only silence and loneliness. Now 11 widows stood behind him, looking to him as if he were their last hope. The warlord stepped forward, his boots shaking the ground. With each stride, the widows flinched, but the rancher did not move. He raised his voice, rough and broken, but steady. "You've taken everything from them," he said. "But you won't take me," the warlord answered with a roar, lifting his blade high. The widows cried out and rushed forward, their glowing weapons meeting the dark fire. Sparks lit the valley. The clash was terrible, steel against steel, light against shadow. The rancher joined the fight, swinging his axe with all the strength left in his bones. Each strike shook his arms, each breath burned in his chest, but he did not stop. He fought, not for land, not for glory, but for the widows who had chosen him. Still, the warlord was stronger. His blade cut through the widows' defenses, throwing them back one by one. Their chants turned into cries of pain, though they rose again, refusing to give in. The rancher knew what was coming. If the fight continued this way, the warlord would kill them all. His eyes darted to the mine tunnels behind him. They were unstable, cracked from years of silence. He had grown up warning himself never to go too near, but now he saw something different. He saw a weapon. The rancher turned to the widows, shouting with all his breath, "Fall back, get clear." They didn't understand his words, but they saw the fire in his eyes. Reluctantly, they stepped away, their glowing blades still raised, their faces torn between fear and faith. The rancher gripped his axe and faced the warlord alone. His voice shook, but he forced the words out. "You want me? Then come and take me." The warlord roared and charged. The rancher turned and ran toward the tunnels, his legs weak but fueled by determination. Rocks shifted under his boots as he entered the mouth of the old mine. The warlord followed, his blade cutting arcs of red, light, shattering the stone walls as he swung. Inside the tunnels, the air grew thick with dust. The rancher stumbled deeper, his heart pounding, his breath ragged. He knew what he had to do. He knew there was no way out. He reached a broken support beam, cracked and groaning under the weight of the earth. With his last strength, he raised the axe and struck. Wood splintered, stone rumbled, and the mine began to collapse. The widows outside screamed as the ground shook violently. The hills split with thunder, sending rocks crashing down. Dust and fire poured from the tunnels. The warlord's roar was swallowed by the sound of falling stone. The widows rushed forward, but the entrance was gone, buried under tons of rock. Their glowing eyes filled with tears as they realized what had happened. The rancher had chosen to stay behind, to bring the warlord down with him. Silence fell over the valley. The enemy soldiers who survived fled in terror, leaving their dead behind. The widows stood in shock, their weapons falling to their sides. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the first widow, the one who had knelt before him on the ranch, fell to her knees. She pressed her glowing ring to the ground, her voice breaking into a song of mourning. One by one, the others joined her. Their voices rose together, sorrowful, yet proud, echoing across the valley like a hymn to the stars. In their song, there was grief, but also honor. The old man had not died alone. He had not died in silence. He had died as their protector, their chosen one, their husband in spirit, if not in flesh. When the sun rose the next morning, the widows stood tall again. They carried the rancher's axe from the rubble, the wood cracked, the blade chipped but still whole. They placed it in the stone circle, a monument to the man who had given them hope. Their law had been fulfilled. The pact was sealed, not by strength, but by sacrifice. And in the hearts of 11 alien widows, the lonely rancher would live forever, not as an old man waiting for death, but as the protector who chose them when no one else would.